Mirror of Death. Sloping, cobblestone alleys of the old district were lined with shops dealing in curios, their windows cluttered with antiquities of forgotten eras. It was part of the city that seemed stuck in a time warp. Dust and decay made faint whispers in the air. Young historian Yousuf Khan was drawn to these streets more often than he cared to admit. On that exact evening, the sun was setting below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the district as Yousuf walked through the area. He was so eager that his heart thumped with anticipation. He had heard of an exclusive auction going to take place, a private affair held within one of the oldest shops in the district, Elixir Emporium. Rumors said that this auction featured some rare pieces, but one piece had caught everyone's attention: a mirror that was cursed. In fact, Yousuf wasn't one to believe in curses or superstitions. He was a man of history, not folklore. Yet, this mirror somehow fascinated him. Maybe because it was said to be from the 17th century, by a master craftsman who miraculously disappeared under mysterious circumstances. As Yousuf walked into Elixir Emporium, the smell of old wood and varnish enveloped him. Light from flickering lanterns lit up the shop. There was a small congregation of collectors and enthusiasts hovering around the auctioneer as whispers filled the charged atmosphere. "Lot 27, the auctioneer began to say in a low, resonant voice. "The Mirror of Benedictus, starting at 5,000 rupees." The crowd parted slightly to reveal the mirror. In an ornate ebony frame carved with intricate patterns, the glass seemed to shimmer unnaturally, as if hiding secrets within its depths. Yousuf felt a strange pull, as though the mirror itself was inviting him closer. He raised his hand almost instinctively. 6,000, he said firmly. A murmur rippled through the room. Another bidder, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, countered. 7. Yousuf hesitated for a moment before raising his hand once more. 10,000. The room went silent. The auctioneer's gavel cracked on the podium. "Sold to the gentleman in the navy coat." Yousuf approached the mirror. Its surface was unnervingly smooth, reflecting not just his image but something more. A fleeting shadow that vanished before he could really focus on it. Back at his modest apartment, Yousuf carefully placed the mirror against the wall of his study. He admired the craftsmanship of the frame, running his fingers over the intricate carvings. For hours he researched its history, but found little beyond vague mentions of its creator, Benedictus, and whispers of disappearances linked to its previous owners. That night he dreamed of strange things. He saw a mirror standing single and solitary in some dismal, cavernous apartment, with shadows dancing inside it that had shapes that somehow belonged to him, yet didn't. A voice whispered in the darkness of his mind, "Reveal your truth." He woke up drenched in cold sweat, the words still lingering in his ears. Within the next few days, Yousuf observed strange happenings in front of the mirror. The things reflected within its surface looked hazy and constantly shifting. Once he felt that a man stood right behind him. Turning around there, of course, was no man. Determined to know the truth, Yousuf requested his closest friend and fellow historian, Amir, to have a closer look at the mirror. "This thing is freaking me out," Amir said, squinting at the carvings on the frame. "These patterns, they're not just decorative, they're symbols. Ancient ones. Alchemical, maybe." "What do they mean?" Yousuf asked. "I don't know, but they seem to form some sort of invocation or seal." That night, Yousuf decided to test the mirror a little further. He lit a candle and stood before it, staring into the depths of the mirror. The flame danced eerily in the reflection, and for an instant, he caught sight of his own face in the glass. But it was twisted, with hollowed eyes and a grin full of malice. He lurched backward, knocking a candle over to extinguish it. The room went dark, except for the faint glow coming from the mirror. The following morning, Yousuf woke up to see scratches on the walls of his study as if someone or something had clawed at them. He felt a sensation of being watched, even when he knew he was alone. A knock at the door startled him. An old man, frail and hunched, with piercing gray eyes. "You bought the mirror," the man said, his voice trembling. "How do you know that?" Yousuf asked, unnerved. "I was its keeper once," the man replied. "It shows you things you shouldn't see. It feeds on your fears, your doubts. You must destroy it before it consumes you." When he could ask more, however, the man shuffled away. Yousuf was left with more questions than he had answers. Yousuf's obsession with the mirror deepened. He sat for hours staring into its depths, convinced that something was hidden within. And one night, tracing on the carvings etched on its frame, he saw that the symbols on it began to glow with a faint light. Heavy air, low hum. The glass shivered, and a scene unfolded within. A forest, dark and foreboding, with a lone figure standing in the distance. The figure turned, revealing a face identical to Yousuf's, but hollow and lifeless. A sudden knock on the glass snapped him out of the trance. It came from the inside of the mirror. Yousuf stumbled back. His brain was racing. He realized the mirror was not just an object, but it was a gateway leading to something incomprehensible. The days after Yousuf's encounter with the old man were filled with discomfort. The mirror seemed more alive than ever, with a will of its own. Strange things started to happen around the apartment. Doors would open by themselves, and shadows would flicker on walls without any apparent cause. The reflection in the mirror often seemed to warp reality. Late at night, Yousuf sat in his study looking at the mirror. He had tried to cover it with a cloth, but in vain. It would slip off from under the cloth, and the mirror remained open to view, its surface glistening with a faintly visible sheen in the dim light. This night, Yousuf decided to experiment further. He put a small glass of water in front of the mirror and turned off the lights. The dim moonlight filtering through the window was enough to illuminate the room. Staring into the mirror, he noticed something unsettling. The glass of water in the reflection rippled slightly, as though disturbed by an unseen force. He looked at the actual glass. It was perfectly still. A shiver ran down his spine. He leaned forward, his breath misting the mirror surface. A faint knock echoed through the room, as if from within the mirror itself. Yousuf recoiled backward, his heart thumping fast. The knock came again, louder. He tried to run away, but his legs had turned immovable. The glass surface started shimmering, and a dimly lit form appeared inside it. Its shape is not well defined, but humanoid nonetheless. Who are you?" Yousuf whispered softly. There was no reply. He raised a hand and pointed at him straight. The next morning, Yousuf decided he couldn't face this alone. He called Amir, who arrived within the hour, carrying books and notes he had gathered about alchemical symbols. "This mirror is more than just a relic," Amir said after examining it again. "These symbols, they're ancient, older than anything I've seen. They're meant to trap something, or someone, inside." "Trap? You mean there's something alive in there?" Yousuf asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if it's alive, but it's definitely not natural. And if what I've read is correct, interacting with it could be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Mirrors like this are said to act as gateways," Amir explained. "Not just to other places, but to other realities. If you're not careful, you could find yourself on the wrong side of it." That evening, as Amir walked out, Yousuf found himself standing in front of the mirror once more. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hum that was coming off the glass. He pondered over the words that the old man had shared with him. "You must destroy it before it consumes you," the man had said. But how could he destroy something so intricately crafted, so steeped in mystery? What if doing so unleashed whatever was trapped inside? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, a soft voice interrupted his contemplation. "Yousuf." He froze. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the mirror. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Help me," the voice whispered, almost inaudible. "Please, help me." The figure from before coalesced again, this time its form more distinct. He was a man, dressed in 17th century attire, his face deathly pale and gaunt. "Who are you?" Yousuf asked. "My name is Benedictus," the figure said. "I am the one who made this mirror, but I am also its prisoner." Benedictus told his tale in fractured whispers. An alchemist he was, who had long been obsessed with making a mirror to reveal the soul's truth. But things went wrong, terribly wrong. The mirror had become a vessel, catching not only his essence, but a myriad of others who had gazed into it over the centuries. "You must break the seal," Benedictus urged. "Free me, and I will ensure no harm comes to you." "How can I trust you?" Yousuf asked, his skepticism outweighing his fear. "You have no choice," Benedictus replied. "The longer you keep the mirror, the more it will take from you. It feeds on your fears, your memories, your very life force." He could no longer ignore the warning, and Yousuf searched for a way out of this problem. His research led him to an obscure manuscript in the city library that details the rituals to unbind enchanted objects. He would need to obtain salt, a silver blade, and an incantation written in Latin. But as he collected these things, the reflection in the mirror grew in power. His nightmares got more intense, the forms in the mirror more aggressive. He sometimes felt their clammy hands reaching out for him, touching his flesh. One night, preparing for the ritual, the glassy surface of the mirror darkened, and a deafening roar filled the room. A face showed up in the glass, not Benedictus, but something far more sinister. Its hollow eyes and jagged teeth sent waves of terror through Yousuf's body. "You can't get away from us," the entity growled. "The mirror belongs to the shadows, and so do you." Yousuf's resolve wavered. Was he truly prepared to face whatever lay beyond the glass? Yousuf stood on the edge of a precipice, the silent hum of the mirror in the background, calling to him, beckoning him closer to the unknown. Each day that passed, the mirror grew more insistent, more malevolent. The voices were louder now, not just in his dreams, but echoing throughout the apartment. His thoughts seemed to be no longer his own, as if the mirror were taking root in his mind. One evening, after hours of research, Yousuf sat hunched over a desk, flipping through old tomes in search of a solution. He had begun to believe that the mirror's curse was more than just an alchemical artifact. It was alive, sentient even, aware of its power and waiting for the right moment to claim him. As he flipped through one of the dusty tomes, a loud, sharp knock rang through the apartment. His heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the clock. It was late. Too late for any visitor. His pulse quickened. The knocking continued, grew louder, more insistent. With trembling hands, Yousuf stood up and walked toward the door. He did not know why, but a part of him felt that opening the door was going to let something much worse into his room than what sat behind the glass. The other part was telling him to open the door, however, since this was the part infected by the mirror. He came up to the door, hesitated, listened carefully, and knocked, was not heard anymore. But the apartment felt different somehow. He had a strange sense of being watched. He flung the door open, but the hallway was empty. And yet, the cold draft that rushed through past his shoulder seemed to carry whispers he couldn't quite understand, but which made the skin crawl on his back. That night, Yousuf lay in bed with his thoughts entirely consumed by the mirror. The air in his apartment felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls were closing on him. The low hum of the mirror could still be heard from the other room. He tried to sleep, but his body remained restless and his mind chattered on with fear. It was then that the nightmare began. Yousuf found himself standing in front of the mirror again, but this time, it wasn't just a reflection of him staring back. There were others, hundreds of figures, all staring at him with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in agony. Some were clawing at the glass, desperate to get through. Others stood motionless, their eyes burning with an unnatural light. His heart pounded trying to step back from the mirror, but his legs were frozen. The shapes in the mirror began talking. Their voices were in a low, guttural whisper. "Let us in." They murmured collectively, "Let us in." Yousuf's breath caught in his throat. He could feel their cold fingers pressing against the glass, their faces warping as they tried to break free. He wanted to scream, to run, but the mirror's power held him captive. The reflection of himself began to change. His own face became distorted, twisted in pain, as if the mirror was pulling him into its depths. With a sudden flash of energy, Yousuf ripped himself away from the mirror and stumbled backward, his eyes bulging with fear. He was dripping in sweat. His heart shook inside his chest. The figures from the reflection remained in his mind. The following days found Yousuf in an increasing desperation. The mirror was no longer an inanimate object in his apartment. It was now a living being, an evil presence that had found a place in his soul. It fed off his fear, twisted his thoughts, and clawed at his sanity. His encounters with the figures in the reflection became more frequent. They no longer appeared only in the mirror. They followed him wherever he went. In his peripheral vision, he would catch glimpses of them, the gaunt faces, the twisted hands reaching out from the darkness. Yousuf's friends and family noticed a change in him. His face had become emaciated, pale, with dark circles under the eyes like he hadn't slept in ages. His sharp mind seemed muddled, his thoughts diffused. But the worst of it was the eyes. There was something unnatural in them now, as if the mirror stole part of his soul. It was then that Amir returned, beckoned by a strange urgency in his messages. Yousuf was sitting before the mirror, staring blankly into it when Amir arrived. His heart sank in his chest as he gazed at the change that had taken place within his friend. "Amir," Yousuf whispered hoarsely, "I need your help. I don't know how much longer I can resist it." Amir advanced slowly. "What is happening to you, Yousuf? What is this thing? You must destroy it." "I have tried," Yousuf said, his voice shaking, "but it will not let me. I can feel it inside me, twisting my thoughts, my memories. It's too powerful." Amir's eyes flicked towards the mirror. The surface seemed to shimmer, as if alive, pulsating with unseen energy. He took a deep breath, steeled himself. "Yousuf, we have to do it. It is the only way to break its grasp." That night, by the faint light of dancing candles, Amir and Yousuf prepared for the ritual. They had brought everything they needed: salt, the silver blade, and the ancient scroll. As Amir started chanting the incantation, the temperature in the room immediately dropped. A cold breeze swept through to extinguish the candles, and an icy chill filled the room. The mirror was shimmering ominously, reacting to the words. Yousuf's heart began to pound. His breath grew ragged as the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, and the figures in the mirror began to stir. Their eyes glowed with malevolent hunger. "No!" Yousuf gasped, stepping back. "It's not working, it's getting stronger." Amir's voice faltered, but he continued with the chant. "We have to finish it, Yousuf. Don't let it consume you." But it was too late. The mirror began to crack. A deep, guttural sound filled the room, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The shadows from within the glass surged forward, reaching out for Yousuf. "Yousuf!" Amir shouted, but it was drowned out by the deafening roar. Yousuf's apartment became a prison of shadows, whispering unseen horrors in every corner. Once familiar rooms felt alien, and as if the curse of the mirror had spread beyond its frame and infected every inch of his house. He sat motionless on the sofa, looking at the door to his bedroom where the mirror awaited him, stronger than ever. The failed ritual lingered in his mind, like a haunting memory. Amir, who had barely escaped the chaos, was nowhere to be found. His messages went unanswered, and Yousuf feared the worst. But the worst was yet to come, as he would soon realize that the mirror's power was growing, and its hunger for him was insatiable. The night was eerily quiet, a silence that belied the usual cacophony of the city. It was a silence that set the hairs on Yousuf's neck standing on end, as if the world itself held its breath. He lit a candle, its flame casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The electricity had been out for hours, another cruel twist of fate that left him that much more vulnerable to the dark presence of the mirror. He sat in the living room, trying to distract himself with an old book, when a soft, almost imperceptible sound caught his attention. It was coming from the bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like fingernails tapping against glass. He could feel his heart beat faster as he realized it came from the mirror. "Again," he whispered, his voice trembling. Summoning whatever little courage he had left in him, Yousuf stood up and walked towards the bedroom door. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if the mirror knew he was coming. He pushed the door very slowly open, candlelit, illuminating the room in a shadowy, flickering glow. The mirror was where it sat always, but its glass wasn't at all how he remembered it. Water would ripple in such ripples, and faint marks made by a hand imprint on the glass from its opposite side. Yousuf's breath caught in his throat as the hand began to push harder, the glass distorting as though it were about to shatter. He stumbled back, dropping the candle. The room plunged into darkness. The following morning, Yousuf went to a small bookstore he had come across during his research. He knew the owner, an elderly man named Ibrahim, was believed to have some information regarding the occult and supernatural matters. Ibrahim looked up from behind his desk when Yousuf entered, piercing gaze as if trying to see right through him. "You have seen it, haven't you?" Yousuf hesitated before nodding. "The mirror. It's cursed. It's trying to..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ibrahim gestured for him to sit. "Tell me everything." As Yousuf recounted his experiences, Ibrahim's expression grew darker. When he finished, the old man leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "That mirror is not just cursed, it's a gateway," Ibrahim said gravely. "A doorway between our world and something else, something that should never be allowed to cross over." "Can it be destroyed?" Yousuf asked, desperation evident in his voice. Ibrahim shook his head. "Not in the conventional sense. But there may be a way to seal it, to banish whatever resides within it. It will require a sacrifice." Yousuf's stomach turned. "What kind of sacrifice?" Ibrahim didn't answer directly. Instead, he handed Yousuf a small, leather-bound book. "Everything you need to know is in here. But be warned, the price for meddling with such forces is always steep." Back in his apartment, Yousuf sat by the window, poring over the book. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and incantations. This ritual looked much more complicated and involved than the one he had attempted with Amir. It included a blood offering, the drawing of a binding circle, and the invocation of an ancient name that sent shivers down Yousuf's spine just from reading it. As he readied what he needed, the apartment seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker. The hum from the mirror had become steady, a macabre accompaniment to the preparations he made. Then, when all was done, Yousuf faced the mirror. His heart was pounding, and with a great effort in his voice, he started off with the incantation. The mirror's surface rippled, and the figures inside started to stir. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light as they pressed against the glass, their whispers growing louder. The room shook as the ritual reached its climax. The mirror cracked, and a dark, swirling mist began to seep out. Yousuf continued the chant, his voice growing hoarse as the air grew thick with an otherworldly presence. Then the soft whispers turned into screams. "You can't banish us!" they shouted in a united voice, their anger thick in the air. The mirror shattered, and chaos reigned in the room. Yousuf was thrown back, and he fell unconscious from the blast. Yousuf woke up to an awfully quiet room. The mirror is gone, only shards of glass littering the floor. But relief was very short-lived, because he immediately realized that the dark mist hadn't disappeared. Instead, it had spread into the apartment, clinging onto the walls like a living thing. And then he heard it, a voice low and guttural from the shadows. "You think you've won?" it said, a sinister laugh following the words. The mirror was only the beginning. Yousuf's blood ran cold as he realized that the true horror had only just begun. Yousuf sat in the middle of his ruined living room, broken glass and tendrils of dark mist clamping against the walls like moving shadows. The air itself seemed heavy, thickened by some oppressive energy that stifled breath. The broken pieces of the mirror lay scattered, but its evil presence became more powerful. A voice echoed through the apartment, deep and guttural, from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Did you think breaking the mirror would end this?" it sneered. "You've only opened the door wider." Yousuf's heart pounded. He took the leather-bound book that Ibrahim had given him, and the ancient pages trembled in his shaking hands. The ritual to banish the entity had failed, and now he was alone to face the darkness he had unleashed. The apartment lights flickered as the mist began to coalesce in the center of the room. Slowly, it took on a humanoid form, its glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. The entity loomed over Yousuf, its presence radiating malevolence. "You cannot stop me," it said. "You belong to me now." Yousuf gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. "Number, I'll end this," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. He turned to the book and incanted the final ritual over it. The words that rolled from his tongue heaved with ancient powers. Candles around lit up brighter than before in the same instance. The entity roared, its voice shaking the walls. It lunged towards Yousuf, but an invisible barrier stopped it. The binding circle he had drawn on the floor glowed with an intense blue light, holding the creature at bay. "You think your feeble rituals can contain me?" it snarled. The space began to alter with the repetition of the mantra. Walls seemed to become melted into a vast expanse of nothingness. It wasn't his apartment anymore, but a realm which went against logic and reasoning. The creature burst out in laughter, its sound resounding throughout the void. "You crossed into my world. Now there is no coming out." Yousuf's voice faltered, and he clutched the book tightly. The ritual demanded more, a sacrifice. He had read the passage earlier but had hoped it wouldn't come to that. To seal the gateway and banish the entity, he had to offer something precious. The book began to glow, and a single word appeared on its pages, written in fiery script: life. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. That is, the only way for the entity to be defeated was if he gave up his life to seal the gateway. The creature was now advancing. Its shape became larger and more gruesome at every step, and there were faces twisted in pain appearing on its surface, their silent screams filling Yousuf's mind. "You can't win," it said. "Give in to despair." Yousuf closed his eyes and thoughts poured into his mind. Life, friends, choices, and everything that has made him who he is. He knew what to do. With tears streaming down his face, he placed his hand over the glowing word in the book and whispered, "I accept." A blinding light burst forth from the book, covering both Yousuf and the thing. The creature screamed and sounded with rage and fright as the light consumed the thing. The void convulsed, and darkness was forced back. When Yousuf opened his eyes, he was back in his apartment. The mist was gone, and the air was still. The shards of the mirror had vanished, leaving no trace of the nightmare that had unfolded. But Yousuf was not the same. His reflection in the window showed eyes that seemed older, wearier, as though he had aged years in a single night. He turned to the book, now lying shut on the table. blank cover, empty pages. Whatever power it had lay in, that was gone now. Outside, the city was alive with the first sounds of a new day, the screams of children, the roars of cars, oblivious to what Yousuf had seen. He emerged onto his balcony, inhaled the crisp morning air. The battle was fought and won, but that which would never heal entirely were the scars.